Could a mysterious woman, bound by ancient curses, and a mere merchant, with nothing but his spices to guide him, really take on the forces of the infamous Lord Zyros and his Dark Legion? Welcome to Galactic Conundrums. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss news stories. Felix Morris stood behind the counter of Galactic Flavors, his small spice shop nestled deep within the heart of Alpha 9 Station, a bustling trade hub in the far reaches of the galaxy. The scent of exotic spices filled the air, a faint hum of artificial lights buzzed overhead, and the quiet ticking of the station's heart, a massive engine driving the entire structure, served as a constant reminder of just how far Felix was from Earth. But to him, it was home. He was in the middle of preparing a new promotional batch of his latest creation, nebulous salt, a shimmering, glimmering dust that not only enhanced the flavor of any dish but also made it glow faintly in the dark. Felix had a knack for concocting unique blends, but nothing could have prepared him for the bizarre interruption that would shake his quiet life to its core. Without warning, the doors to his shop exploded open, sending a shower of metallic fragments across the polished floor. The artificial light outside flickered, casting an eerie, jagged glow across the room. Through the storm of debris, a figure emerged, tall, graceful, and undeniably dangerous. She stumbled in, her footsteps like a soft whisper against the shattered glass. Astrid Anaris. Her skin was a deep, mesmerizing shade of violet, with veins of gold that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her every breath. Her hair, silver white and ethereal, floated weightlessly around her head as if the laws of gravity had no claim on her. But it was the three massive eclipse blades glowing with an ominous, shimmering light that thrust out of her chest that held Felix's attention. Each blade was unique. One blazed with the intensity of a dying star, another seemed to absorb the very light around it, and the third emitted an eerie, blue glow that seemed to twist the air around it. The sight was so surreal that Felix couldn't tell whether it was a dream or reality. "Sorry," Felix said, his voice oddly calm, though his eyes flicked nervously to the broken door. "But I just cleaned. Could you, maybe take those out? You know, for the sake of my counter? They might scratch the surface." Astrid's gaze locked onto him, her golden eyes burning with a silent intensity. "You're Felix Morris, aren't you?" she rasped, her voice a low, haunting melody. "Only you can free me from this curse. Only you can pull the eclipse blades out, Felix. You must." Felix raised an eyebrow, his fingers still gripping the cloth as he wiped down the counter for the third time that hour. "Pull them out," he muttered, glancing from the three swords protruding from her chest to the gleaming display of spices behind him. He could feel a strange, inexplicable pull in the air around him, as if the entire station was holding its breath. Astrid's eyes seemed to burn into his very soul. "The curse has held me for 3,000 years. This world of darkness, of isolation. You are the one who can release me, Felix. I beg of you, pull the swords out." Felix hesitated, taking in the bizarre nature of the situation. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who was this woman? Why was she here? And why him, of all people? Yet, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the strange gravity pulling him toward her. A part of him that, despite the absurdity of the moment, knew that this was no ordinary customer. "All right," Felix said with a sheepish grin, still trying to process the bizarre nature of his situation. "Let's just get this over with, shall we?" With an odd mixture of hesitation and curiosity, Felix gingerly reached toward the first eclipse blade. His fingers brushed against the hilt of the glowing weapon, and the moment his hand made contact, the entire shop seemed to shudder. A crackling energy filled the air as the blade slid out as easily as if it were nothing more than a spoon being pulled from a bowl of honey. Light exploded around him, so blinding that Felix instinctively shut his eyes. He heard Astrid gasp, a low, shuddering breath that sent a ripple through the space between them. When the light finally subsided, the air felt charged electric with something ancient, something powerful. Astrid stood before him, her eyes wide with wonder. Her back arched as if a heavy weight had been lifted, but still, the two other eclipse blades remained lodged in her chest, darkening the air around her. She looked at Felix with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. You did it," she whispered, her voice now thick with something like disbelief. "You freed me from one of the blades, but the other two, they continue to bind me. They cause pain, pain that never ends." Felix, who had been frozen in place, still holding the blade like it was some sort of kitchen utensil, blinked rapidly. "Right," he muttered. "But, I think those swords are still scratching my counter." He glanced down at the pristine surface, now scarred by the presence of the eclipse blade. Astrid moved closer, her presence radiating an undeniable power. She towered over him, her energy nearly overwhelming as she stood with two swords still embedded in her chest. "My savior," she murmured, the words dripping with something strange, "you are truly untainted. But it is not enough. These blades must all be removed. Only then can I be freed." Felix was caught between awe and confusion. "Look," he said with a nervous chuckle, "I'm just trying to make some star spice blend here, okay? Not a whole vessel for ancient power thing." He tried to shake off the eerie feeling that was building in his chest. Astrid's smile softened into something warm, almost affectionate, as she leaned closer to him. "You are far more than you realize, Felix Morris," she said, her voice low and hypnotic. "Far more." Felix blinked again, feeling more than a little out of his depth. "I really hope this doesn't void my shop's insurance," he muttered under his breath. The mysterious woman in front of him, her body illuminated by the strange light of the blades, was both a vision of beauty and danger, wrapped in a puzzle of ancient curses, forgotten prophecies, and a future he had no idea he was now a part of. And with that, the adventure that would change Felix's life and the fate of the galaxy had just begun. The moment Felix yanked the first eclipse blade from Astrid's chest, an enormous wave of energy exploded outward, shaking Alpha 9 Station to its very core. It wasn't just a physical tremor. No, this was the kind of force that could bend the very fabric of reality. The lights flickered violently, casting jagged shadows across the shop, as the energy surged and hummed, crackling with untamed power. Felix, still holding the glowing blade, barely had time to process what was happening before a blinding flash of light enveloped the room. Astrid stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat as she steadied herself, feeling the strange energy ripple through her body. Her eyes, glowing golden, were wide with awe and pain as she grasped her chest. "That was unexpected," Felix muttered under his breath, staring at the sword in his hand. "I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the brochure." But just as Felix tried to regain his composure, the chaos outside escalated. The station's artificial day cycle blinked and sputtered, casting the place into an eerie twilight. Outside, the space around Alpha 9 station seemed to tear open a rift of swirling dark energy swirling in a vacuum of space. The Dark Legion, led by the notorious Lord Zyros, had arrived. From the shadows of the rift, a massive ship descended, its black, jagged hull cutting through the void like a predatory beast. The Dark Legion, a terrifying force of armored warriors, began to pour out from the vessel, their sleek black exosuits glinting ominously under the distant starlight. Their red eyes burned with unholy intensity, like flames from the depths of a dying sun. And at the helm of it all, Lord Zyros himself, a figure cloaked in an aura of darkness, appeared in the heart of the rift. His voice rang out, echoing through the station's frequency, sending shivers down Felix's spine. Felix Morris, his voice was low, almost a growl, reverberating with malice and power. You cannot escape me. The blades of Calome must belong to me. They have the power to reshape the universe, and I will not allow you to wield them so carelessly. Felix blinked in confusion, looking back at the sword in his hand and then at the two still lodged in Astrid's chest. What did I just get myself into? He mumbled. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond anything he could have imagined, but as always, he couldn't shake that strange, inexplicable feeling this might be his chance to make a difference. And, of course, it was definitely not good for business. The eclipse blade he held vibrated in his hands, a deep hum resonating from within its core. The air around him felt dense, like it was alive, reacting to the power he had just unleashed. He couldn't help but notice how the blade seemed to pull at his very soul, urging him to hold it tighter, to embrace its power. Astrid, still recovering from the shock, turned her eyes toward him. Her golden eyes locked with Felix's, a mix of urgency and unspoken understanding passing between them. Felix, she said, her voice steady but laced with pain, Lord Zyros will stop at nothing to claim those swords. He thinks he can control them, bend the universe to his will. But the blades, they will not bend to anyone's control. You've already begun something that cannot be undone. As the Dark Legion stormed the station's outer edges, their ships forming an imposing ring around the station, Felix felt the first true taste of what this meant. Lord Zyros, a being of untold darkness, wasn't just some galactic warlord. He was a harbinger of destruction, the kind of villain who saw no value in life, only power. Felix ran his fingers along the eclipse blade's hilt, and in that instant, he knew he had to act. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping a catastrophe before it consumed everything he knew. He couldn't back down now. He looked at Astrid, who was standing tall, despite the pain she was clearly in. All right, he said, more to himself than to her. Let's do this. Astrid gave him a look, a rare, vulnerable moment where her fierce, war-hardened exterior softened for just a split second. Be ready, she warned him, her voice low and almost affectionate, but her gaze filled with a fierce intensity. You've already stepped into a war that spans millennia. There's no turning back. As Lord Zyros' fleet loomed closer, Felix couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The battle was coming, and whether he liked it or not, he was now at the center of it. Outside, the space rift began to pulse more violently, signaling that the Dark Legion was preparing to strike. The station began to hum with the energy of battle. The lights flickered again, this time with a pulsing rhythm that seemed to sync with the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Felix couldn't just hide behind his counter anymore. This was no longer about spices or tea. The station was about to become ground zero for a war that would decide the fate of the entire galaxy. With a deep breath, he raised the eclipse blade to the sky, the blade shimmering and humming with untold power, casting long, sharp shadows against the walls of the shop. His hand trembled slightly, but a fire ignited within him, a fire that told him one thing: the universe wasn't going to save itself. And so, the war began. The air inside Galactic flavors felt charged, unnaturally still, like the calm before the storm. Felix Morris stood frozen behind the counter, hands still gripping the cloth he had been wiping the counter with. He couldn't stop staring out the window, where the darkness of space was now being pierced by vast silhouettes of ships descending toward Alpha 9 Station. His small spice shop, tucked away in the corner of the bustling station, had never seemed more vulnerable. The artificial lights above flickered once, twice, and then buzzed loudly, as if the station itself was reacting to the impending chaos. Felix's pulse quickened. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but all he could do was watch the massive ships coming into view, immense battle cruisers, their jagged edges gleaming with dark metallic sheen, followed by smaller vessels brimming with robotic soldiers, dark war machines, and weapons of mass destruction. The Dark Legion had arrived. Did you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun, or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. As the ships began to orbit the station, casting their shadows over the entire structure, Felix's stomach sank. He could feel the vibration in the air, the shifting of energy around him, as the hostile force began their descent. He swallowed hard and rubbed his eyes, certain that he must be imagining the sheer scale of it all. The station was under attack. Under siege. Felix stepped closer to the window, his breath fogging up the glass as he tried to get a better view. Outside, the scene was utterly surreal. A vast armada of warships, the kind of ships that could obliterate entire worlds, slowly descending on Alpha 9 Station. The Dark Legion had begun their assault. Their massive warships, which stretched across the void, began firing beams of dark energy at the station's outer defenses, blasting holes through the exterior as they encircled the fragile spaceport. Felix's thoughts scrambled. What was he supposed to do now? He wasn't a soldier, not by any stretch of the imagination. He didn't know anything about war. He was just a simple spice merchant, for crying out loud. But here he was, trapped in the middle of an intergalactic conflict, with the fate of the station hanging in the balance. His eyes moved over to Astrid, who was standing calmly across the room. Astrid Anaris, the enigmatic woman who had just emerged from a curse that had bound her for millennia, now standing in his shop, exuding an aura of dangerous calm. Her golden eyes were fixed on the dark horizon, scanning the incoming threat. There was no fear in her gaze, just determination. Felix, on the other hand, felt a rush of anxiety build up in his chest. "This isn't good," he muttered, his voice tight. "I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to make a living selling spices. Not this." Astrid didn't flinch. She stood there for a moment longer, her body a perfect picture of poised confidence, before turning to Felix. She crossed the room with a single fluid motion, every step echoing with purpose. "You're right. This isn't good," Astrid said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Her tone was calm, almost serene, despite the chaos unfolding outside. "But it's happening, Felix. There's no turning back now." Felix was still processing the situation, trying to steady his breath, but his eyes were glued to the view outside. The warships were growing closer, their massive cannons charging up for another devastating strike. He could feel the hum of energy reverberating through the walls, like the station itself was preparing for battle. "Can we talk about a truce?" Felix asked, his voice tinged with a mix of panic and hope. "Is there a way we can all sit down and have a nice cup of tea instead of, blowing everything up?" He gestured toward his counter where several tea sets and spice jars sat, completely out of place in the chaos surrounding them. Astrid's lips curled into a small, amused smile, but there was something dark about the amusement. Her golden eyes sparkled with an ancient fire, reflecting both wisdom and battle-hardened experience. "Felix, you're a spice merchant. You think these people care about tea?" She took a step closer, her movements slow, deliberate. "This isn't a peace talk. This is war. They are coming to tear this station apart." Felix winced as another explosion rattled the walls. Space outside the station was glowing with destructive energy, the spaceport's shields flickering under the strain. Lord Zyros was here, and he wasn't here for a negotiation. He was here to claim the power that had been sealed for centuries, and it didn't seem like he was in the mood to negotiate. "I'm not a warrior, Astrid," Felix said, his voice small but desperate. "I don't know what to do in a situation like this." Astrid gave him a sharp look, her gaze unwavering. "You don't have to fight. I'll protect you," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I've seen war in every corner of this galaxy, Felix. And it's not going to end until Lord Zyros gets what he wants." Felix swallowed, nodding slowly, though the weight of her words was still sinking in. He glanced at the broken door of his shop, the hum of the station's power systems flickering and dimming as the battle outside continued. The fate of Alpha 9 Station and possibly more was hanging by a thread, and Felix, a simple spice merchant, was at the center of it. The eclipse blades, which still pulsed with an eerie light, seemed to beckon him. He didn't understand their power, didn't even know how he had become the one to wield them. But there was no time to question it. He had to do something. Felix looked back at Astrid, who was already preparing herself. Her movements were slow and fluid, like a predator ready to strike. "What do I do?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Astrid's lips tightened, but her eyes softened for a brief moment. "Stay out of the way. I'll do what needs to be done." She turned toward the door, her purple skin shimmering in the artificial light as she raised one hand. Her eyes flashed with power, and golden symbols began to form around her. Felix could sense the ripple of energy as her strength surged. She was ready to fight. Felix, though filled with fear, had an overwhelming desire to do something, anything to help. But he didn't know where to begin. His hands fumbled over a few of his jars of spices, unsure of how he could possibly contribute to such a galactic conflict. Another blast shook the station, this time closer, much closer. The Dark Legion was advancing, and Lord Zyros's ships were now in full assault mode. Felix's mind raced, the weight of the situation slowly sinking in. The fate of the station wasn't just in the hands of Astrid, or the Eclipse Blades. It was in his hands too. Even if he couldn't wield the swords the way Astrid could, maybe, just maybe, his spices, his creations might have some small role to play in the chaos ahead. Felix took a deep breath, pushing the fear aside. He stepped forward, shaking off his hesitation. He didn't know how to stop this, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not anymore. All right, Felix said to himself, finally finding some courage. Let's see what happens next. Astrid glanced over her shoulder, giving him a sharp nod. Good luck, Felix. Then, with a flurry of motion, she was gone, heading into battle with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived through 1,000 wars. Felix stayed behind for a moment longer, unsure if he was ready to face what lay ahead. But he was no longer just a spice merchant who had stumbled into a fight he didn't understand. Now, he was part of something much bigger, a battle for the fate of the universe. And somehow, he would have to figure out how his spices fit into this strange, cosmic puzzle. The air crackled with raw energy as Astrid Anaris unleashed her full might. Felix barely had time to process the intensity of the moment before she was in motion, moving faster than he could track. Her violet skin shimmered in the low light of the station, her white hair floating behind her like gossamer threads, as if gravity itself had no claim on her. In a blur of movement, Astrid darted into the heart of the Dark Legion's ranks. Her body moved with an elegance that belied the ferocity of her strikes. She was a whirlwind, her limbs striking out with blinding speed, each hit landing with the force of a stellar collision. Her first blow sent a Dark Legion warrior crashing through the station's metal walls, leaving a gaping hole where there had once been solid structure. The robotic soldiers that filled the station's corridors were no match for her lightning-fast reflexes and superhuman strength. They staggered back, their mechanical limbs twitching as if they couldn't compute the speed at which she moved. Felix could only stand by, wide-eyed and frozen in shock. The Eclipse blades still embedded in Astrid's chest glowed a bright, eerie blue, their power pulsing as if they were alive, feeding off the chaos around them. Every time she struck, the air itself seemed to ripple, her movements leaving trails of light in the wake of her punches. Astrid spun, knocking another robot warrior off its feet with a swift kick to its chest. It flew backward with such force that it collided with the ceiling, crumpling like paper in the vacuum of space. Felix, who had been half expecting to hear the sounds of explosions or the metallic screech of machinery failing, was instead treated to the unnerving silence of a battle fought in absolute precision. It was almost as if the universe itself paused in reverence to her combat skills. She was graceful, yet devastating, like a warrior goddess raining down destruction. Felix, she called over her shoulder, her voice laced with something playful, yet dangerous, is there anything you can do? Or should I handle it all? Felix blinked, snapped out of his dazed stupor, and glanced at the carnage unfolding before him. The Dark Legion was being decimated, their hulking figures knocked aside like ragdolls. He swallowed, trying to muster up some semblance of courage. Well, Felix stammered, glancing down at his apron. I mean, I just sell spices, that's pretty much all I do. He looked around, then added in an almost hesitant whisper, but, I think I might be able to try something. I've got some spicy cinderfire salt I've been working on. It's, a bit explosive. Astrid didn't pause in her relentless onslaught, but a grin tugged at her lips as she effortlessly sent another robot warrior into the next galaxy with a single swipe of her hand. Spicy salt. You think you can use that to help? Felix shrugged, nervously adjusting his apron. Well, I've always said my spicy peck sauce has some unexpected side effects. Maybe this salt will do the trick. Astrid laughed, a sound that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. You might be more useful than I thought, she teased, her golden eyes flashing as she decimated yet another soldier. But you'll have to be quick, Felix. They are coming in waves. Felix, who had been hoping that Astrid would solve the entire problem, now realized that he might actually have to do something. He ran toward his counter, grabbing a small jar of cinderfire salt. He could almost feel the heat radiating off it as he twisted open the lid, the scent of smoky spice mixing with the acrid smell of burning metal. With a deep breath, he sprinkled the salt onto the floor and immediately felt the air grow heavy with energy. The grains of salt shimmered in the artificial light, and then boom. A blast of fiery sparks erupted from the floor, sending a shockwave that knocked a dozen Dark Legion soldiers off their feet. They flailed helplessly, their armored bodies sizzling from the extreme heat. Astrid stopped mid-strike, her eyes widening as she turned to Felix, impressed. Well, I'll be damned. That actually worked. Felix blinked, a bit taken aback by the sudden success. Yeah, I guess it did, he muttered, trying not to look too surprised. I mean, I've got a whole range of explosive products. Astrid's grin widened, and she gave him an approving nod before returning her focus to the chaos around them. Well then, Felix, she said with a wink, it looks like we make quite the team. With that, the battle raged on. Felix, still uncertain of what exactly he was supposed to be doing, continued to unleash his strange brand of culinary chaos, using his spices to create explosions, disorienting the enemy and giving Astrid the openings she needed to tear through the Dark Legion with unmatched speed and precision. Felix, though mostly just along for the ride, had begun to realize something. Perhaps this unexpected combination of spices, blades, and otherworldly powers was exactly what was needed to save the galaxy from destruction. Felix stood still, his heart hammering in his chest as he gazed at the three Eclipse blades still lodged in Astrid's chest. The first one, the one he'd pulled out so carelessly, had unleashed a force he could hardly comprehend, shaking the entire station and sending energy spiraling in all directions. But now, two more swords remained, each glowing ominously in the dim light of his shop. He eyed them warily. The moment he had pulled the first blade, he had known this wasn't some ordinary day at the office. But now, with the second blade staring back at him, Felix could sense that whatever happened next would take things to a level he could never have anticipated. This can't just be some regular sword pull, Felix muttered to himself, his fingers hovering over the second Eclipse blade, the power in the air almost palpable. Astrid, having just finished decimating the Dark Legion's latest wave, turned to Felix, her golden eyes sharp as ever. Careful, she warned, her voice low but full of urgency. That blade holds much more than you realize. But Felix, his curiosity now far outweighing his caution, couldn't help himself. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the blade. The instant he made contact, everything around him seemed to collapse inward. A flash of blinding light exploded from the hilt, making his vision go white. His body tensed as if a massive current of power had surged through him, flooding every fiber of his being with electric energy. He gasped, dropping to his knees, but not from the pain instead. It was the overwhelming weight of the cosmic force that felt like it had suddenly become a part of him. The energy rippled outward from Felix, a wave of untamed power spreading like a shockwave. The walls of galactic flavors trembled, and the lights flickered and buzzed. The very air seemed to vibrate as if it couldn't quite contain the vastness of the energy being released. And then, as if the universe itself couldn't stay still, the station-shuttered space itself seemed to twist. The force was so great it caused the very fabric of space-time to ripple in Felix's immediate vicinity. The Dark Legion soldiers outside, who had been storming the station's interior, were suddenly thrown into disarray, their mechanical movements halting, their advanced technology malfunctioning from the force emanating from Felix. Felix could feel it, the power coursing through his veins. It wasn't just the sword in his hand, but something inside him was shifting. Something ancient. It felt as though the very cosmos was awakening within him, every part of the universe suddenly connected to his consciousness. He looked at the blade, his fingers still wrapped around its hilt. His breath came faster as the energy surged, and then a voice deep, resonant, and ancient whispered in the back of his mind, one that he couldn't place, but that felt all too familiar. You are the chosen one. The blade seeks you, and now, so does the power. His head spun, and he staggered back, catching himself against the counter. The sheer intensity of the power was overwhelming, and yet, Felix couldn't deny it. He had felt something shift. The universe had shifted with him. What is this? Felix gasped, looking at Astrid, his eyes wide with both fear and wonder. What's happening to me? Astrid's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of recognition in them. She had known this moment would come. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her movements graceful despite the chaos around them. You've unlocked the power of the blades, she explained, her voice steady and low, as though she were speaking to someone who had just awoken from a long, dreamless sleep. The Eclipse blades are not simply weapons. They are keys. Keys to a power older than the stars themselves. And now, that power is yours to command. Felix's mind raced as he processed her words. He had always thought of himself as a simple spice merchant, a man more familiar with the scent of exotic herbs than with the mechanics of cosmic destiny. And yet here he was, holding a weapon that could shift the balance of the entire universe. His fingers tightened around the sword, and once again, he felt the energy pulse within him. Cracks of light split the air, and fractures in the station's walls began to form. The blade in his hand hummed, as though in response to his growing realization. Felix was now connected to something vast, something that he couldn't quite control or fully understand. But it didn't matter. He didn't have time to process it all. Outside, the Dark Legion was recovering from the shockwave he had created. The battle was far from over. What do I do now? Felix asked, his voice shaky but determined. Astrid stepped closer, her eyes now glowing even brighter, filled with a mix of pride and urgency. Now you learn to wield it. The universe will soon know your name, Felix. We will fight together, but first, you must understand the full power within you. Felix clenched his jaw, feeling the sword's hum vibrate in his bones. The once ordinary man who sold spices and herbs was now tied to something greater, something he had no choice but to confront. The fate of not only his shop, but perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in his hands. He looked out the shattered window, seeing the Dark Legion regrouping. Lord Zyros was coming. And Felix had no choice but to face him. Lord Zyros hovered in the darkness, his piercing gaze locked onto the chaotic scene unfolding before him. From the command center of his mighty flagship, he observed the carnage on Alpha 9, stationed through a holographic screen. The once sleek, orderly invasion was now spiraling into disarray. His army, the indomitable Dark Legion, had been thrown into confusion by a force they could neither comprehend nor control. Zyros, the all-powerful warlord, paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared intently at the display. His dark cloak billowed with every turn, a living shadow, but his mind was anything but calm. The reports he was receiving made no sense. Felix Morris, a mere spice merchant, was holding the fate of this battle in his hands. What in the void is happening? Lord Zyros growled, his voice low and filled with disbelief. This cannot be. How can a simple human have the power to cause such disruption? He is merely a merchant, a seller of herbs. No one has ever been able to disrupt my army like this. The scene on his screen showed Felix standing in the center of the battlefield, holding the Eclipse blade, now glowing brighter than ever. Cosmic energy swirled around him, a vibrant aura pulsing in sync with the power of the blades. It was as though the very fabric of the universe was being bent and twisted by the force emanating from Felix's hands. The Dark Legion soldiers, powerful in their own right, were now struggling. Their advanced weaponry and tactics were useless against the unpredictable waves of energy that Felix's swords were sending out, causing their movements to slow and their systems to glitch. Some soldiers froze in place, their mechanical limbs shaking as though they were alive with fear, while others were flung backward, helpless against the raw power unleashed by the swords. One of his elite commanders appeared on the screen, visibly shaken. Lord Zyros, the soldiers are losing control. The energy pulses from the swords are disrupting everything. Their systems are malfunctioning. We cannot gain ground. Zyros's brow furrowed in frustration, the tendrils of his dark aura flickering as he clenched his fists. I don't care about your excuses, he snapped, his voice cold and deadly. I demand answers, now. What is Felix Morris doing? The commander, struggling to keep his composure, responded, It's as if the swords are alive, my lord. Their energy doesn't follow any known laws. It's as if they are reaching into the very fabric of space-time, manipulating it. And the merchant, he's somehow linked to it. Lord Zyros snarled, his anger rising like a storm. The room around him grew colder as he extended his hand toward the screen, a glowing red energy sparking at his fingertips. This is madness. I don't care about your limitations, Commander. You will fix this, or you will not be of use to me anymore. He cut the connection and turned back to the holographic battlefield, his mind racing. Felix Morris, a man who should have been lost in the insignificance of his trade, was now the source of an unprecedented cosmic phenomenon. The Eclipse blades, once thought to be relics of an ancient, forgotten civilization, had found a new bearer, one who seemed to possess an unbelievable connection to their power. How? Why? Meanwhile, Felix, utterly unaware of the magnitude of the situation, simply continued to stand in the middle of the chaos. His eyes flicked over the surrounding destruction, the flashes of light from exploding Dark Legion ships and the occasional robot soldier thrown into the air like ragdolls. But despite the devastation, Felix didn't seem fazed in the slightest. "Well, this is a bit much, isn't it?" Felix mumbled to himself, his voice completely nonchalant. "I think I may have accidentally created a space storm, but hey, no big deal, right? I've done worse." He looked around, his eyes falling on a nearby shelf. "Maybe it's time to try out that new spicy meteor dust I was working on. You know, just to, calm things down." With a sudden surge of inspiration, Felix reached for a small jar of meteor dust, a new blend he had been concocting. It was a spicy mix of crushed stellar spices and cosmic salts, known for causing small, localized explosions. Felix, ever the optimist in the face of galactic chaos, sprinkled a small amount on the counter. Instantly, the powder sizzled, sending a burst of red-hot energy across the surface. The tiny explosion sent a shockwave rippling outward, and Felix, completely unaware of the growing cosmic resonance of his actions, raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Huh. That's new." But to his horror, the mediated dust's power did more than he expected. The cosmic storm in the air shifted and intensified. The air around him crackled with energy, and more powerful waves of force radiated outward from his hands, shaking the very station's foundation. The eclipse blades in his grip seemed to respond, humming with a sudden, frenzied pulse. The ripple effect cascaded across the station, making the Dark Legion soldiers freeze, their cybernetic systems glitching, their weapons misfiring in random directions. Felix glanced down at his hands, still holding the mediated dust. "Oh, this can't be good," he mumbled under his breath. "Guess I really should have read the instructions on this stuff." Meanwhile, Lord Zyros, now watching the catastrophic scene unfold, slammed his fist down on the console. "Impossible," he roared. This human, this mere merchant, he has turned the tide of everything. How is he doing this?" His mind raced as he saw the power Felix was wielding, the eclipse blades, his accidental spice-induced storm, and the chaos that Felix was causing without even realizing it. "This is no ordinary being," Zyros muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief and frustration. "Felix Morris, he's more dangerous than I thought." Felix, now lost in the chaos of cosmic power and confusion, continued to wander through the battlefield, unaware that his spices and random actions had now put him at the center of an intergalactic storm. His innocent humor as spice merchant playing with cosmic forces had somehow become the key to a battle that could reshape the entire galaxy. The battle raged outside the walls of Galactic Flavors, but within the small, eccentric spice shop, the sounds of war explosions, mechanical screeches, and the rumbling of ships seemed strangely muffled, as if they were a world away. Felix Morris stood behind his counter, eyes wide, his hands trembling as he held a bottle of his spicy peck sauce. It had all happened so fast. One moment, he was trying to figure out how to handle the eclipse blades, and the next, he was unexpectedly at the center of a galactic war. The Dark Legion, after being thrown into confusion by the power of the eclipse blades and Felix's accidental energy storms, had paused long enough for Felix to do the one thing he knew best, use his spices. Felix, in a moment of pure inspiration, or desperation, depending on how you looked at it, grabbed the bottle of spicy peck sauce, which he had concocted from a blend of the fiery Centaurian peppers and a few secret ingredients, including some Jovian salt. He had no idea what kind of impact it would have on the war zone outside, but in the face of unfathomable destruction, he thought, why not? With a flourish, Felix poured a generous helping of the sauce into several small cups, carefully placing them on a tray. He couldn't believe it, but he felt a sense of confidence that was both surreal and oddly fitting for someone who had just unwittingly summoned galactic chaos. Maybe this will do the trick, he murmured to himself, as the soldiers from the Dark Legion continued their march toward his shop. Astrid, watching him carefully, gave him a skeptical look. Felix, I don't know if the sauce can stop a war. We need to be ready for. But Felix, with a mischievous grin, cut her off. Trust me, Astrid. If there's one thing I know, it's how to handle a few spicy peppers. He turned toward the Dark Legion soldiers who were closing in on him, weapons raised. Felix wasn't sure if they were ready to blow up the entire station or simply rip it apart piece by piece, but one thing was clear: they were not in the mood for peace talks. Felix stepped forward with a tray in hand, raising it high, his voice suddenly unreasonably cheerful. Hey! I know this might not be your usual thing, but how about a little break? A quick sip of tea and some of my famous peck sauce? It'll do wonders for you, I promise. For a moment, everything paused. The soldiers who had been advancing with military precision stopped, confused. Their weapons still hovered in the air, but their expressions were a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Felix, ever the optimist, smiled broadly and gestured to the sauces, placing 1 cup of spicy peck sauce in front of the nearest soldier. Trust me, he said with a wink. This will turn your whole day around. The soldier, unsure what else to do, cautiously took the cup and took a hesitant sip. The moment the sauce hit his tongue, there was a flash of light, like a mini explosion of flavor, a burst of intense heat that seemed to awaken every nerve in his body. But it wasn't just the spice. It was something else. Something calming. In an instant, the soldier's tense posture softened. His mechanical joints, which had previously been locked in battle-ready precision, now relaxed. His glowing red eyes flickered, fading to a peaceful amber hue. The air around him shifted from chaos to a surprising stillness. Felix looked around, half expecting the soldier to erupt into flames or demand his head for trying such a ridiculous stunt. But to his astonishment, the soldier looked back at him with a confused expression, then set down his weapon. I feel strange. The soldier muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Then, with a sudden, almost playful smirk, he grabbed a second cup of sauce. Well, why not? One by one, the soldiers hesitantly began sampling Felix's peck sauce, their battle lust melting into something far less aggressive. In the midst of the chaos, the air slowly began to fill with the sound of laughter, which sounded both bizarre and wonderful in such a violent situation. The soldiers, once ready to tear apart the station, were now lounging in chairs, sipping tea, and chatting with one another, as if they were gathered at a peace conference. Felix stared in disbelief, his jaw slack. "Well, this is unexpected," he muttered, stepping back to watch as the Dark Legion warriors, once fierce and aggressive, now looked like they had just stumbled into a spicy food festival. Astrid, equally stunned, couldn't help but laugh softly. "Felix, you've done the impossible." Felix rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "I guess spices really can change the universe, huh?" He shrugged, a grin forming. Who knew? With the soldiers now more interested in discussing their favorite dishes and tea blends than fighting, the battle had somehow come to an abrupt and peaceful halt. The warlords outside, expecting a showdown of cosmic proportions, were instead treated to the bizarre spectacle of intergalactic warriors negotiating with spice merchants. Felix looked around at the now peaceful scene, as the eclipse blades hummed softly in the background, their powers somehow subdued by the unexpected calm that had settled over the battlefield. "Well," he said, wiping his hands on his apron, "maybe I'll just stick to spicy solutions from now on." Astrid shook her head in amusement, her golden eyes gleaming with admiration for the unlikeliest hero the galaxy had ever seen. The darkness of war that had plagued the galaxy seemed to melt away as Alpha 9 Station stood at the center of an unprecedented moment in galactic history. What had once been a battleground for the forces of the Dark Legion and the armies loyal to Lord Zyros was now a strange symbol of peace created not by armies or weapons, but by a spice merchant and his quirky, world-changing seasonings. Lord Zyros, his imposing presence now seemingly diminished, stood in an awkward truce, his cold eyes scanning the scene before him. The once ruthless warlord had been forced to reconsider everything he knew about control, power, and conquest. The Dark Legion, his proud army, was seated at long tables, enjoying the spicy concoctions that Felix had carefully prepared. In fact, the entire station had transformed into a bizarre culinary summit, where warriors from across the stars who had fought tooth and nail for supremacy just hours earlier were now trading recipes, laughing, and savoring each new dish. Felix stood at the center, surrounded by various leaders and beings from distant galaxies, all engaged in peace talks over bowls of his famous spicy dishes. He couldn't quite believe what was happening. The universe, which had been teetering on the brink of destruction, had been saved by a dash of pepper and a spoonful of sauce. Astrid, standing beside him, glanced at Felix with a soft, amused smile. The warrior princess, who had fought countless battles across the cosmos, now found herself quietly enjoying the chaotic peace that Felix had created. "Felix," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and affection, "you've saved the galaxy and you didn't need a single bullet." Felix, still a bit overwhelmed by the turn of events, chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm not exactly sure how all of this happened, but I guess. I've always believed food brings people together." He scratched his head, still adjusting to the fact that he was now the hero of this bizarre story. Who would have thought that spices could save the universe? He chuckled again, clearly baffled by the weight of his own words. The station, now a hub of unlikely allies, seemed to hum with an energy all its own, an energy that wasn't about weapons or domination, but about sharing, understanding, and most importantly, enjoying the simpler things in life. From the massive warships that had once clashed above, commanders now sat across from one another, passing bowls of steaming food and laughing at their previous misunderstandings. Felix glanced around at the various species and factions, all now united by his culinary talents. The Andromedans, once wary and distant, were exchanging stories with the Centaurians, whose sharp eyes were now softened by the warmth of a shared meal. Even a few of the Dark Legion commanders had put down their weapons, exchanging tales of home and family with their former enemies, all of them blissfully unaware of how strange it was to be sitting at a table instead of aiming their guns. The blades that had once bound Astrid were now placed carefully on display, no longer symbols of violence, but of freedom that came at the cost of battles fought and lives lost. And yet, despite all that had happened, there was a calm in the air now, a lightness, an ease that hadn't existed before. Astrid leaned in closer to Felix, her golden eyes soft with affection. "You don't realize it yet, do you?" she said, her voice gentle. "You've done what no one else could do. You've turned war into something beautiful." Felix looked at her, his brows furrowing. "I'm just a spice merchant, Astrid," he said, shaking his head. "What do I know about saving the galaxy?" Astrid's smile widened, her eyes sparkling. "You know more than you think, Felix. You've proven that even the smallest gestures, a simple meal, a shared moment of joy, can change the entire course of history." Felix took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words sink in. Maybe it wasn't the Eclipse blades or the intergalactic fleets that had won this battle, but something far simpler: human connection. Food, laughter, and the shared experience of breaking bread with those who were once enemies. These things had changed the universe in ways Felix never imagined possible. "Well," he said, his voice light, "I guess I should really start a new line of spicy teas next. Who knows? Maybe it will help with intergalactic diplomacy." Astrid laughed, the sound like the ringing of silver bells in the air. "Felix, I think you've redefined what it means to be a hero. Maybe we should send a sample to Lord Zyros next time, see if it softens his heart." Felix smiled shyly, looking out over the peaceful gathering in front of him. He had done it. He had saved the galaxy. Not with weapons, not with force, but with something far more unexpected: spices, kindness, and a dash of humor. And so, in a way no one could have predicted, Felix Morris, the humble spice merchant, had saved the galaxy. Not with fleets of warships, not with powerful weapons, but with a simple act of sharing a meal. His peculiar blend of spices and his kindness had turned enemies into allies, and war into a banquet of peace. Alpha 9 Station, once on the brink of annihilation, had transformed into a beacon of unity, where rivals sat side by side, sharing stories over bowls of Felix's legendary dishes. Who would have thought that a bottle of sauce could hold such power? But it did, because sometimes, true power doesn't come from strength, but from understanding, connection, and a little bit of spice. Lord Zyros, the fearsome warlord, now sat with a cup of Felix's tea, his once imposing armor discarded beside him. The mighty Dark Legion soldiers, once set on destruction, were now peacefully discussing recipes and cooking techniques with the Andromedans and Centaurians. The Eclipse blades, once symbols of violence, now rested in a place of honor, a testament to the journey that had brought peace to the stars. As Felix looked around at the bizarre but beautiful peace he had unknowingly brought about, he couldn't help but chuckle. "Who would have thought?" he said, shaking his head. "All it took to save the galaxy was a bit of spice and a lot of accidental luck." But deep down, Felix knew something that no one else had realized, not even Astrid. The real power was not in the spices themselves, but in the moment of connection they had created. In a universe where war had once seemed inevitable, perhaps understanding even through something as simple as food could truly be the most powerful force of all. Felix turned to Astrid, who was still beside him, her eyes full of pride and amusement. So, any other galaxies you need saving? I'm thinking of launching a new line of spicy tea blends. What do you think? Astrid laughed softly, her eyes glowing with something much warmer than the battle-ready fire from before. You've already saved them all, Felix. The galaxy had been changed not by soldiers, not by war, but by the most unexpected of heroes. And the universe? Well, the universe had finally learned that sometimes, the smallest things like a cup of tea or a dash of spice could bring about the greatest revolutions. But one question still lingered in the air, unanswered: what happens next? Will Felix Morris become the most famous spice merchant the universe has ever known? And if so, what new adventures await him? One thing was certain: the journey wasn't over yet. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure at Galactic Conundrums.